I am Darcy Whitlock, and I've always been the odd one out in my family, tinkering with circuits and dreaming of ways to outsmart cancer, while my parents, Vernon and Marge Whitlock, fawned over my brother Lyle and his business degree like it was the second coming. Growing up in our creaky Vancouver suburb house, I'd spend hours in the garage, piecing together prototypes from scavenged electronics, my hands smudged with solder and my head buzzing with ideas. Meanwhile, Lyle's report cards, B's and C's, mind you, were framed like museum pieces, and his summer internship at a car dealership was treated like a Nobel Prize win. Me? I was the hobbyist, the one who wasted time on science fairs, even when I brought home first-place ribbons. Vernon would just grunt, "That's nice, Darcy," before asking Lyle about his latest sales pitch. Marge would pat my head and say, "Don't strain yourself, dear," as if my brain was a delicate teacup. It stung, but I learned to swallow it, channeling my energy into my work, into the belief that one day I'd build something undeniable. My latest project, a non-invasive cancer detection device, was starting to turn heads. Professors at UBC were calling it revolutionary, and I'd been quietly meeting with biotech firms who threw around words like game changer and partnership. I never imagined my phone would ring at the perfect moment, though, pulling me out of the shadows in a way I couldn't have scripted. But before I tell you how that call flipped my world upside down, let me know where you're watching from and hit subscribe. You'll want to see how this ends. Back to it. My family's dismissal wasn't just neglect. It was a deliberate choice. Vernon, a retired accountant with a permanent scowl, and Marge, who ran a knitting club like it was the UN, had decided long ago that Lyle was their golden ticket. He was charming, I'll give him that, with a salesman's grin and a knack for schmoozing. But his big plan? A chain of vape shops. The future of retail, he'd crow, while I was in the lab, trying to save lives. I'd overhear Marge whispering to her friend Glenda over tea, "Lyle's got ambition, not like Darcy with her little gadgets." Little gadgets. That's what they called a device that could detect cancer markers in blood samples faster than anything on the market. I'd lie awake at night, replaying those words, wondering why my passion was invisible to them. It wasn't always this way. When I was 8, I built a model rocket that actually flew, and Vernon clapped me on the back, proud for a fleeting second. But by high school, Lyle's charisma had eclipsed me. He'd strut into family dinners with stories of closing deals, while my updates about scholarships or lab breakthroughs were met with polite nods and quick subject changes. I started keeping my wins to myself, like the time I presented at a national conference at 17, or when my prototype got me a grant to fund my studies. I didn't need their approval, I told myself, but deep down, I wanted them to see me, just once. Now at 23, I was on the cusp of something huge. My company, Whitlock Biotech, was inches from a multi-million-dollar deal with a firm in Seattle. I should have been over the moon, but instead, I was dreading the annual family dinner next week. It was the one night a year we all sat down together, and I knew what was coming. The same old jabs, the same old blind spot for my work. I'd sit there picking at Marge's overcooked roast, while Lyle bragged about his vape empire, and Vernon nodded like he was hearing gospel. But this time, something was different. My phone was buzzing with emails from investors, and I had a feeling the dinner wouldn't go the way they expected. I can still smell the cedar polish from our old dining room table, the one where I'd sit as a kid, watching my family orbit around Lyle like he was the sun. Those memories hit hard, especially when I think about how my achievements just slipped through the cracks. Take grade 9, for instance. I'd spent months building a solar-powered water purifier for the regional science fair, staying up past midnight in the garage, my fingers blistered from hot glue. When I won first place, I rushed home, trophy clutched to my chest, expecting Vernon to finally look up from his newspaper. Instead, he mumbled, "Good job, Darcy," then turned to Lyle, who'd just sold a second-hand bike for a $20 profit. "Now that's initiative," Vernon said, his eyes lighting up. Marge baked Lyle's favorite lemon loaf to celebrate. My trophy sat on my dresser, gathering dust. It wasn't a one-off. In grade 11, I got a full scholarship to UBC's biomedical engineering program, one of 50 kids in the country picked for it. I practiced telling my parents for days, hoping for a spark of pride. At dinner, I finally blurted it out, my voice shaky. Marge smiled thinly and said, "That's lovely, dear, but don't overwork yourself." Vernon just nodded, then asked Lyle about his part-time gig at the mall. Lyle, all grins, launched into a story about upselling phone cases, and the table erupted in laughter. I poked at my peas, my news already forgotten. Later I overheard Marge on the phone with her sister Faye, bragging about Lyle's entrepreneurial spirit. My scholarship didn't get a mention. The pattern was relentless. When I was 16, I built a prototype for a blood glucose monitor that got me an invite to a national STEM conference in Toronto. I had to beg Vernon for the plane ticket, promising to pay him back with my summer job money. He sighed, like I was asking for a pony, but gave in. I came back with a mentorship offer from a top engineer, buzzing with possibility. At home, I tried to share it, but Lyle interrupted to announce he'd joined the school's business club. Marge clapped her hands, saying, "That's my future CEO!" Vernon slapped Lyle's back, and my moment fizzled out. I stopped trying to compete after that, tucking my victories away like secret letters. It's not that Lyle was cruel, he wasn't. He'd flash me a sympathetic smile sometimes, like he knew I was getting shortchanged, but he never pushed back. Why would he? He was basking in the glow of their attention, and I was just the background noise. Even our extended family got in on it. At Christmas, Aunt Glenda would pinch Lyle's cheek and say, "You're going places, kid," while my cousin Norris would ask me, "Still messing with wires, Darcy?" like my work was a quirky phase. I'd grit my teeth and nod knowing they didn't get it. None of them did. By the time I hit university, I'd learned to keep my head down. I poured everything into my studies, my lab work, my ideas. I didn't tell my family about the late nights coding algorithms or the professors who started calling me a prodigy. I didn't mention the grant I won to fund my cancer detection project or the biotech conference where I presented to a room of investors. It was easier to stay invisible than to hope for their applause and get nothing. But those slights piled up, each one a brick in the wall between me and them. Now with the family dinner looming, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was walking into a room where I'd never belong, no matter what I'd built. My phone buzzed again. An email from a Seattle firm, another step toward the deal that could change everything. I ignored it for now, my mind stuck on those old wounds, wondering if they'd ever stop stinging. I'll never forget the night it clicked, the moment my cancer detection idea went from a fuzzy dream to something real. I was in my tiny UBC dorm room, surrounded by empty coffee cups and circuit boards, my laptop screen glowing with data from a study on blood biomarkers. It was 2 a.m., and I'd been wrestling with a problem. Current cancer tests were either too slow or too invasive, missing early-stage cases. I was 20, barely keeping up with my coursework, but I'd been obsessed with this idea since high school. Ever since Aunt Glenda's breast cancer scare shook me. I thought, what if you could catch it faster, cheaper, without slicing someone open? That night, staring at a graph of protein markers, it hit me. A device that could analyze blood samples in minutes using a microchip and machine learning. I scribbled the concept on a napkin, my hands shaking with adrenaline. The next year was a blur of trial and error. I'd skip meals to afford sensor components, soldering them together in the engineering lab after hours. My roommate, Selma, would drag me out for pizza when I forgot to eat, joking that I'd marry my prototype before a person. I hit dead ends constantly. Chips fried, algorithms failed, and once I spilled coffee on a circuit board I'd spent weeks building. I'd cry in the bathroom, then go back and start over. My prof, Dr. Harlan Voss, saw me struggling and pulled me aside. "Darcy, you're on to something," he said. "Don't quit." His words kept me going when I wanted to chuck it all. By my third year, I had a working prototype, a palm-sized device that could detect cancer markers in a drop of blood, faster and more accurately than anything out there. I named it the Hemlock Scanner, a nod to my last name and the idea of rooting out poison. I tested it in the lab, running samples from a hospital database. When the results came back, 98% accuracy, I sat on the floor staring at the screen, afraid to blink in case it was a glitch. It wasn't. I'd done it, but I kept it quiet, even from Selma. My family's dismissal had taught me to guard my wins, and I wasn't ready to share this with anyone who might brush it off. Then things snowballed. Dr. Voss connected me with a biotech incubator, and suddenly I was pitching to investors in suits who tossed around terms like disruptive innovation. I was terrified, stumbling over my words, but they saw the numbers and got it. A small grant turned into a bigger one, and by 22, I'd founded Whitlock Biotech. My team, Selma, who jumped in as my ops manager, and Quentin, a coder with a knack for AI, worked out of a cramped office in East Vancouver. We were broke but scrappy, fueled by instant noodles and belief. When a Seattle firm offered a pilot program, I knew we were close to something massive. They were talking multi-million-dollar partnerships, and my name started popping up in industry circles. I even got an invite to a global health conference, where I won an innovation award. I'd hold the plaque at night, whispering to myself, "This is real." But I didn't tell Vernon or Marge, not about the prototype, the grants, or the award. I'd learned long ago that their praise was reserved for Lyle's vape shops, not my gadgets. Part of me wanted to shove the hemlock scanner in their faces, but another part was scared they'd diminish it, like always. So I kept it secret, pouring my heart into the work instead. Now, with the Seattle deal on the horizon, I felt like I was carrying a bomb, waiting for the right moment to detonate. The family dinner was a week away, and I couldn't shake the feeling that my silence was about to break, whether I was ready or not. The week before the family dinner, I was a mess of nerves and adrenaline, juggling the biggest moment of my career with the dread of walking back into Vernon and Marge's house. Whitlock Biotech was teetering on the edge of a breakthrough. The Seattle firm Cascade Health had sent a contract outline for a $10 million partnership to scale the hemlock scanner. My inbox was a flood of emails, lawyers hashing out terms, Quentin tweaking the AI, Selma scheduling demos. We were also prepping for a pitch at a global health summit in San Francisco, where a win could lock in more investors. I should have been ecstatic, but every time my phone pinged, my stomach twisted, knowing the dinner was looming. It was like preparing for a gala and a guillotine at the same time. I was in our East Vancouver office, a shoebox with flickering lights and a coffee machine that hissed like it was possessed. Selma caught me staring at my laptop, not typing, and tossed a stress ball at my head. "Darcy, you look like you're planning a jailbreak," she said. I laughed, but she wasn't wrong. I told her about the dinner, how Vernon would probably quiz Lyle on profit margins while Marge asked me if I'd found a nice boy yet. Selma, who'd met my family once and called them a sitcom without the laugh track, just hugged me. "You're a rock star," she said. "They don't deserve you." I wanted to believe her, but the kid in me still craved their nod, even after everything. I tried to focus on work. Quentin and I ran diagnostics on the scanner, double-checking its accuracy before the summit. The numbers held, 99% now after tweaks. I let myself imagine what this could mean. Hospitals using our device, patients catching cancer early, lives saved. But then I'd flash to the dinner table, Vernon's grunt, Marge's tight smile, Lyle's effortless charm stealing the spotlight. I hadn't told them about Whitlock Biotech, the award, or the deal. Part of me wanted to walk in and drop it all like a mic, but another part shrank at the thought of their blank stares. What if they didn't care? What if they twisted it into another reason to praise Lyle? The night before the dinner, I stood in my apartment, picking an outfit like it was armor. I settled on a navy blazer and jeans, professional but not showy, something Marge couldn't nitpick. My phone buzzed, a text from Lyle saying he was bringing his new girlfriend Trudy to dinner. "She's a keeper," he wrote with a winking emoji. I rolled my eyes but felt a pang. Lyle always had someone new, always had a story. I hadn't dated in years, too buried in work, and Marge never missed a chance to remind me my clock was ticking. I texted back, "Cool, see you there," and tossed the phone on my bed. I barely slept, replaying old dinners in my head. The time Vernon toasted Lyle's first vape shop while I sat silent, the time Marge gushed over Lyle's vision while my scholarship went unmentioned. This time, though, I wasn't just the overlooked kid with a science project. I was Darcy Whitlock, founder of a company about to change medicine. As I packed my bag, slipping in the Innovation Award plaque just in case, I felt a spark of defiance. Maybe I'd say nothing. Maybe I'd let the world speak for me. Either way, I knew the dinner wouldn't be just another night. Something was going to shift, and I wasn't sure if I was ready for it. I pulled into the driveway of Vernon and Marge's house, the same squat bungalow I'd grown up in, its faded yellow paint peeling like old skin. My hands were clammy on the steering wheel, and I took a deep breath, trying to shake the knot in my chest. The annual family dinner was always a gauntlet, but tonight felt heavier, like I was walking into a courtroom. I grabbed the bottle of wine I'd brought, a peace offering I knew wouldn't matter, and stepped out, the gravel crunching under my boots. The air smelled of Marge's rose bushes, too sweet, almost suffocating. I could hear laughter from inside, Lyle's voice booming over the rest, and I braced myself for the onslaught. Marge opened the door, her apron dusted with flour, her smile as stiff as cardboard. "Darcy, you made it," she said, like I'd ever missed a dinner. She hugged me, a quick pat-pat, then waved me in. The dining room was already buzzing. Vernon sat at the head nursing a beer, his glasses fogged from the steam of Marge's roast. Lyle was holding court, his arm around Trudy, a bubbly redhead who giggled at his every word. Aunt Glenda and her husband Norris were there too, nodding along as Lyle spun a tale about his latest vape shop opening. I slipped into my usual seat, the one with the wobbly leg, and set the wine down. Nobody noticed. "Darcy, you're looking studious," Glenda said, her eyes flicking over my blazer like it was a costume. Norris chuckled, and I forced a smile, already feeling the familiar sting. Marge bustled in with a platter of overcooked beef, and the table launched into small talk. I tried to blend in, caught asking Trudy about her job. She was a yoga instructor, totally passionate about mindfulness, she chirped, but Lyle cut in, steering the conversation back to himself. "So Trudy's helping me brand the new shop," he said. "We're going for a vibe, upscale but chill." Vernon grunted approval, and Marge beamed, saying, "That's so clever, Lyle." I poked at my mashed potatoes, waiting for the inevitable. It came fast. "So, Darcy," Vernon said, his tone heavy with disinterest, "still fiddling with your little machines?" The table went quiet, all eyes on me. I swallowed, my throat tight. "Yeah, I'm working on a project," I said, keeping it vague. "It's in biotech," Norris snorted. "Biotech? Sounds like sci-fi stuff. You sure that's practical?" Glenda leaned in, her voice syrupy. "It's nice you have a hobby, dear, but have you thought about something stable, like Lyle's business?" Lyle smirked, squeezing Trudy's hand, and I felt my face burn. I could have said it then, told them about the hemlock scanner, the Seattle deal, the award in my bag, but the words stuck. I knew how it'd go. Blank stares, maybe a polite, "That's nice," then back to Lyle's vape empire. So I just shrugged, muttering, "It's going okay." Marge chimed in, oblivious. "Darcy's always been so independent," she said, like it was a flaw. "Not like you, Lyle, with your big plans." The table laughed, and I stared at my plate, the room closing in. Every jab, every backhanded compliment was a reminder I was the outlier, the one who didn't fit their mold. As dessert hit the table, Marge's dry apple pie, Lyle started talking about expanding to Calgary, and Vernon leaned forward, hanging on every word. I tuned out, my mind drifting to the emails waiting on my phone, the deal that could change everything. I didn't belong here. Not really. But I stayed. Because some part of me still hoped they'd see me. That hope was fading fast, though. And as the night wore on, I felt the weight of their disregard settle deeper, like a stone I couldn't shake. The clink of forks on Marge's chipped plates slowed as Vernon cleared his throat, his beer bottle sweating in his hand. The room felt too warm, the air thick with the scent of overcooked roast and Glenda's floral perfume. I'd been half listening to Lyle's latest pitch about vape lounges when Vernon's chair scraped back, silencing the table. He stood, his face set like he was about to deliver a verdict. Marge fidgeted with her napkin, her eyes darting to Lyle, who sat straighter, Trudy's hand clasped in his. I felt a prickle down my spine, like I'd walked into a scene I hadn't rehearsed for. "Darcy, Lyle, we need to talk," Vernon said, his voice low, deliberate. My stomach dropped. He rarely addressed me directly, and never with that tone. I set my fork down, the pie untouched, and waited. "Your mother and I have been thinking about the future," he continued, glancing at Marge, who nodded tightly. "Lyle's got a real shot here, building something solid with his business. We're proud of him." Lyle grinned, and Trudy squeezed his arm. I nodded, expecting the usual praise parade, but Vernon's eyes locked on me, hard and unyielding. "Darcy, you've always done your own thing, and that's fine, but we've decided to support Lyle fully, financially, I mean. The house, our savings, it's going to back his expansion." The words hit like a slap. I blinked, trying to process. Support Lyle fully meant cutting me out. I'd never asked for their money, never needed it, not with my grants and hustle. But the house? Their savings? That was the safety net, the family legacy. I opened my mouth, but Vernon raised a hand. Let me finish. Your projects, they're risky. Biotech, startups, it's not stable. Lyle's got a proven track record. We can't split our resources, so we're choosing the sure thing. Marge chimed in, her voice soft but sharp. It's not personal, Darcy. We just believe in Lyle's vision. The table was dead quiet. Glenda stared at her plate. Norris coughed awkwardly, and Lyle looked at me, his smile gone, like he hadn't expected this either. Trudy's eyes flicked between us, confused. I felt like I was sinking, the room tilting. You're saying I'm on my own? I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. Vernon nodded. You've always been independent. You'll manage. Marge added, We're not saying never, dear, but Lyle needs us now. Needs us. Like I was a stranger, not their daughter. I wanted to scream, to list every win they'd ignored, the scholarship, the award, the Seattle deal. But my throat tightened, and all I could manage was, You're disowning me for vape shops? Vernon's jaw twitched. Don't make it dramatic, Darcy. It's practical. Practical. That word burned. Lyle shifted, muttering, Dad, maybe we can talk about this later, but Vernon shut him down. It's decided. Marge reached for my hand, but I pulled back, my chair scraping as I leaned away. I was invisible to them, always had been, but this was different. This was a line drawn, a door slammed. My whole life, I'd chased their approval, hoping they'd see me. Now they'd made it clear, I wasn't worth betting on. The weight of it crushed me, and I stared at the table, the roast congealing, the wine I'd brought unopened. I felt like that kid again, clutching a science fair trophy, waiting for a pat on the back that never came. But as the silence stretched, something else stirred, a spark of anger, a refusal to break. I didn't know it then, but the next moment was about to crack everything wide open. The silence after Vernon's decree was suffocating, like the air had been sucked out of the dining room. I sat there, my hands clenched under the table, the sting of their words still raw. Marge tried to pivot, offering, Who wants more pie? But no one moved. Lyle's eyes flicked to me, guilty, while Trudy stared at her lap, clearly wishing she was anywhere else. Glenda cleared her throat, mumbling something about the weather, but it died in the awkwardness. I felt like I was floating outside my body, watching myself shrink under their judgment. Then my phone buzzed in my pocket, sharp and insistent. I ignored it, too numb to care, but it buzzed again, then a third time. Vernon frowned. Darcy, can you turn that off? I pulled it out, ready to silence it, but the screen lit up with a name, Dr. Harlan Voss. My heart skipped. Harlan never called unless it was big. Against every instinct screaming to stay small, I stood, muttering, I need to take this, and slipped into the hallway. My hands shook as I answered. Darcy? Harlan's voice crackled, urgent. Where are you? Cascade Health just called. They're signing the deal, $12 million, with an option for more if the summit pitch lands. And the summit? They're giving you the keynote slot. I leaned against the wall, my breath catching. Keynote? I whispered. Yeah, he said, laughing. You're about to be the face of biotech, kid. Check your email. They sent the contract. I stood there, the phone hot against my ear as the weight of it hit. 12 million. A keynote at the Global Health Summit. My Hemlock scanner wasn't just a project anymore. It was a revolution, and the world was noticing. I glanced at the dining room door, hearing Marge's forced chatter, and something snapped into focus. I'd been waiting for them to see me, but I didn't need their validation anymore. Not now. I walked back in, my phone still in hand, and every eye turned to me. Vernon raised an eyebrow. Work? He asked, his tone dripping with skepticism. I could have brushed it off like always, but the spark from earlier flared into a fire. Yeah, I said, my voice steady. That was my advisor. My company just closed a $12 million deal for my cancer detection device, and I'm keynoting a global health summit next month. The words felt foreign, like someone braver was saying them. The table froze, Lyle's jaw dropped, Trudy's eyes widened, and Marge's fork clattered onto her plate. Vernon blinked like I'd spoken another language. 12 million? Glenda squeaked, breaking the silence. Norris leaned forward, squinting. For your gadgets? I nodded, feeling the room shift. It's a scanner, I said. Detects cancer in minutes, 99% accurate. Hospitals are already testing it. Lyle let out a low whistle, and for once he didn't have a quip. Marge stammered. Darcy, why didn't you tell us? I looked at her, then Vernon, and the years of being overlooked poured into my answer. I tried, you never listened. Vernon's face reddened, but he didn't speak. Marge reached for me, her voice shaky. We didn't know it was this big. I stepped back out of her reach. You didn't want to know, I said, and the truth of it felt like a release. The call had come at the perfect moment, not just exposing my success, but shattering the mold they'd tried to force me into. I wasn't their hobbyist daughter anymore. I was Darcy Whitlock, and I was done begging for their scraps of pride. The dinner wasn't over, but I knew what came next, and I was ready to face it head-on. The dining room felt like a stage, every face turned toward me, their shock hanging in the air like static. My phone was still warm in my hand, Harlan's words, $12 million, keynote, echoing in my head. I stood there, heart pounding, as Marge's trembling "we didn't know" lingered, her eyes wide with something like regret. Vernon's mouth was a tight line, his beer forgotten, while Lyle shifted uncomfortably, his usual swagger gone. Trudy stared at me, half awed, half confused, and Glenda clutched Norris's arm, whispering, "Did she say million?" I could have let it slide, sat back down, let them stew in their stunned silence. But the years of being sidelined, of swallowing their dismissal, surged up, and I wasn't backing down. You didn't know because you never asked, I said, my voice sharp but calm, cutting through the tension. I looked at Vernon, then Marge. You called my work a hobby, my prototypes little machines. You framed Lyle's C's but never saw my scholarships, my awards. I turned to Lyle, who flinched. I'm not mad at you, Lyle. You didn't make them choose. But you, I pointed at Vernon, you just disowned me for a vape shop empire because it's practical. And you, I faced Marge, you told me not to strain myself, like my dreams were a burden. The words poured out steady, each one a brick I'd carried too long. Marge's face crumpled, her hands twisting her napkin. Darcy, we didn't mean, she started, but I cut her off. You meant it. Every time you praised Lyle's internships over my grants, his sales pitches over my breakthroughs, you meant it. Vernon cleared his throat, trying to regain control. Now, Darcy, let's not exaggerate. We're proud of you, but Lyle's path is. I laughed, a short, bitter sound that stopped him cold. Proud? You just cut me out of the family legacy for a sure thing. Meanwhile, my company's saving lives. Which one's the sure thing now? The room was dead quiet, the kind of silence that feels like it's holding its breath. Glenda's jaw hung open. Norris looked like he wanted to crawl under the table, and Trudy's eyes darted to Lyle, who was staring at his plate. I pulled the Innovation Award plaque from my bag and set it on the table, the gold catching the light. This is from a global biotech conference, I said, for a device that's already in trials. I didn't bring it to brag. I brought it because I thought maybe this time you'd care. I paused, letting that sink in. But you don't, and I'm done hoping you will. Marge reached for me again, tears in her eyes. Darcy, please, we can talk about this. I stepped back, shaking my head. No, you made your choice. I'm not here to beg for your approval anymore. I grabbed my coat from the chair, my movements deliberate, and looked at Lyle. Congrats on the shops, Lyle. I hope they're everything you want. He nodded, barely meeting my eyes. I turned to the door, then paused, one last thing burning in me. Oh, and Vernon, my risky startup just got a $12 million deal. Maybe rethink what's practical. I walked out, the gravel crunching under my boots, the night air cold and sharp. Behind me, I heard Marge's muffled sob, Vernon's low mutter, but I didn't look back. My car's engine roared to life, and as I drove away, the weight of their rejection lifted, replaced by something fiercer, freedom. I'd spent years chasing their pride, but I didn't need it. The world was already seeing me, and I was just getting started. Driving away from Vernon and Marge's house, the adrenaline still buzzed in my veins, but a quiet relief was settling in, like I'd finally exhaled after holding my breath for years. The city lights blurred past, Vancouver's skyline sharp against the night, and I didn't head home. Instead, I drove to the East Vancouver office, where I knew Selma and Quentin would be. They were my real family, the ones who'd seen me at my messiest, sleep-deprived, stressed, crying over a fried circuit, and still bet on me. I needed them now, not to gloat about the dinner but to feel grounded, to remind myself who I was outside that suffocating dining room. I pulled up to our office, a squat brick building wedged between a laundromat and a taco shop. The lights were on, and through the window I saw Selma hunched over her laptop, Quentin sprawled on a beanbag, typing on his. I let myself in, the bell above the door jingling. Selma looked up, her braids swinging. "Darcy? Thought you were at the family roast." Quentin grinned, pushing up his glasses. "How many times did they ask if you're dating?" I laughed, a real one, and dropped into a chair. "Too many, but it's done, I'm done with them." They didn't push, just waited, and I spilled it all. The disownment, the call from Harlan, my exit with the plaque drop. Selma's eyes widened at the $12 million part, and she let out a whoop, jumping up to hug me. "You're a badass, Darcy Whitlock," Quentin high-fived me, saying, "Keynote, you're gonna kill it." We cracked open a bottle of cheap sparkling cider, our tradition for big wins, and sat on the floor, passing it around. The office smelled of burnt coffee and solder, but it felt like home. Selma toasted, "To Darcy, who doesn't need anyone's permission to shine." I clinked my mug, my throat tight with gratitude. We talked late, not about work, but about everything. Selma's dream to visit Ghana, Quentin's latest Dungeons & Dragons campaign, my half-baked plan to adopt a cat. It was the opposite of the dinner. No judgment, no hierarchy, just us, laughing until my sides hurt. Selma shared how her mom had doubted her career choice too, pushing her toward nursing instead of ops management. "Blood doesn't always get it," she said. "You find your people." Quentin nodded, admitting he'd left home at 18 when his dad called his coding nerd stuff. They got it, the ache of being unseen, and it made me feel less alone. I thought about the contrast, the cold formality of Vernon's verdict versus this messy, warm circle. My family had chosen Lyle's vape shops over me, but Selma and Quentin chose me every day, through late nights, failed tests, and my endless rants about algorithms. They'd been there when I doubted myself, when the Hemlock scanner was just a sketch on a napkin. This was what family should be. Not obligation, but belief. I pulled out my phone and showed them the summit email, the one confirming the keynote. Quentin read it aloud, doing a mock announcer voice, and Selma fake cried, "Our girl's famous!" We laughed until I snorted cider, and for the first time that night I felt light, like I could breathe. As we cleaned up, Selma hugged me again, softer this time. "You're enough, Darcy? Don't forget it." I nodded, the words sinking in. The drive home was quiet, the city asleep, and I realized I wasn't just leaving the dinner behind, I was choosing a new kind of home, one built on trust, not blood. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine, and that was more than enough. The days after the dinner felt like waking up from a long, bad dream. I was still riding the high of walking out, of finally saying my piece, but the fallout was messier than I'd expected. Marge called the next morning, leaving a voicemail that was half apology, half deflection. "Darcy, we didn't mean to upset you, but you have to understand our position." I deleted it before she finished. Lyle texted, a cautious, "Hey, can we talk?" I didn't reply. Not out of spite, but because I needed space to figure out what came next. The $12 million deal was moving fast. The summit keynote was 3 weeks away, and I had to focus. But first, I had to set boundaries, real ones, to keep my family's chaos from dragging me back. I started small. I blocked Vernon's number after he left a gruff message about family unity. Marge's calls went to voicemail, and I muted the group chat where Glenda kept posting passive-aggressive memes about gratitude. It felt strange, like cutting a tether, but also freeing. I'd spent years bending over backward to fit their mold, and I was done. At the office, Selma noticed my quieter mood and brought me a coffee, no questions asked. Quentin, less subtle, asked, "You okay, boss? Need me to hack their Wi-Fi?" I laughed, shaking my head, but their support steadied me. They were my anchor now, not Vernon's grudging nods or Marge's tepid praise. A week later, Lyle showed up at my apartment unannounced, holding a takeout bag from my favorite dumpling spot. I almost sent him away, but his face, nervous, not cocky, made me pause. We sat on my couch, the dumplings untouched, and he spilled. "I didn't know they'd cut you out like that," he said, rubbing his neck. "I thought they'd split it, help us both." I believed him, mostly. Lyle wasn't cruel, just comfortable in their spotlight. I told him about the years of being overlooked, the scholarships they ignored, the hobby jabs. He listened, really listened, and admitted, "I should have said something. I just didn't see it." It wasn't a full fix, but it was a start. I told him I needed time, that I wasn't ready for family dinners or Marge's knitting club invites. He nodded, leaving the dumplings behind. Professionally, I was drawing lines too. The Cascade Health deal was intense. Meetings, revisions, demos, and I had to be sharp. I told Selma to screen any family-related calls during work hours. When Marge showed up at the office with a Tupperware of cookies, Selma gently turned her away, saying I was in a meeting. It hurt, picturing Marge's face, but I couldn't let her guilt trips derail me. I was learning to prioritize myself, something I'd never done. At night I'd journal, scribbling thoughts like, I don't owe them my success, until it felt true. By the time the summit prep kicked into high gear, I felt steadier. I practiced my keynote in the office, Selma and Quentin as my test audience, heckling me until I nailed the pacing. My phone stayed quiet, no family drama to pull me off course. I wasn't cutting them out forever, just until I could stand on my own terms, not theirs. The Hemlock scanner was my focus, my legacy, and I wasn't letting anyone dim it. As I packed for San Francisco, I caught my reflection in the mirror, saw the kid who'd built rockets in the garage and smiled. She was still there, and she was calling the shots now. San Francisco was a whirlwind, the Global Health Summit a blur of bright lights and sharper minds, and standing on that keynote stage, I felt like I'd finally stepped into my own skin. The Hemlock scanner's demo brought the house down. Doctors, investors, even a few teary-eyed patients in the crowd gave me a standing ovation. I walked off with a $5 million grant from a European health fund and a stack of business cards thicker than my laptop. Back in Vancouver, Whitlock Biotech was no longer a scrappy startup. We moved to a bigger office, hired a small team, and started trials in 3 hospitals. But what hit me hardest wasn't the money or the buzz. It was the chance to make Whitlock mean something beyond Vernon's scowl or Marge's knitting club. I was reclaiming it, on my terms. I threw myself into using the scanner's success for good. We partnered with a nonprofit to bring low-cost screenings to rural clinics, places where early detection was a pipe dream. I'd visit these sites, watching nurses use our device, seeing patients' faces when they got results in minutes, not weeks. One woman, Clara, hugged me after her scan came back clear, saying, "You gave me my life back." I cried in my car afterward, not from sadness but from the weight of it. My work was real, touching lives, doing what I dreamed of in that garage years ago. Every trial, every saved life, was a brick in the legacy I was building, one that had nothing to do with my family's approval. Back home, I started a scholarship fund for women in STEM, named after my high school science teacher, Miss Doreen Platt, who'd slipped me extra lab time when I was broke. The first recipient, a shy coder named Libby, sent me a thank you note that I pinned above my desk. I also spoke at UBC, sharing my story, not the glossy version, but the messy one. The doubts, the family drama, the nights I nearly quit. Students mobbed me after, asking for advice, and I told them what I wished I'd heard. Your worth isn't in who cheers for you, it's in what you build. A few mentioned seeing my summit talk online, which had gone viral, racking up millions of views. Whitlock was becoming a name tied to hope, not vape shops. My family stayed at arm's length, and I kept it that way. Lyle sent a cautious email congratulating me on the summit, and I replied politely but briefly. Marge mailed a card with a check for $500, scribbling, "For your company." I donated it to the scholarship fund. Their gestures felt like too little, too late, and I wasn't ready to let them back in. But I wasn't angry anymore, just focused. I'd spent so long chasing their pride, but now I was creating something bigger, something that outshone their narrow view of success. The office became my sanctuary, Selma and Quentin my constants. We'd celebrate small wins, new trial data, a fixed bug, with takeout and bad karaoke. I adopted a cat, a scruffy tabby I named Salder, who'd nap on my keyboard while I worked late. Life wasn't perfect. I still had moments of doubt, wondering if I'd ever fully heal from the dinner's sting. But when I saw my name in a medical journal, or got an email from a patient who'd caught cancer early because of the scanner, I knew I was enough. The Whitlock name was mine now, tied to lives saved, futures changed, and that was a legacy worth fighting for. The Vancouver rain was tapping my apartment window, a soft rhythm that matched my breathing as I sat with a mug of tea. Salder curled up on the couch beside me. It was a quiet Sunday months after the summit, and I was reflecting on how far I'd come. The Hemlock scanner was in 10 hospitals now, with trials expanding to Europe. Whitlock Biotech had a staff of 20, and I'd just signed a deal to fund screenings for low-income communities. My inbox was full of thank yous from patients and invites to speak at conferences. But what struck me most, sitting there with the city humming outside, wasn't the accolades or the numbers, it was the calm inside me, a peace I'd never known. I'd spent so long chasing my family's approval, measuring my worth by their glances, but now I saw it clearly, my value was mine to define. I thought about the dinner, that raw wound of being cut out for Lyle's vape shops. It still ached sometimes, like a bruise you forget until you press it. But the pain didn't own me anymore. I'd built something real, not to prove them wrong, but because it was who I was. The kid who'd wired rockets in the garage was still here, dreaming big, and I'd honored her. I didn't need Vernon's grunt or Marge's pat to know I was enough. That truth settled deep, like a stone in still water, and it changed everything. I wasn't running from their rejection or toward their praise, I was standing still, whole in my own story. Lyle reached out recently, asking to meet for coffee. I went, curious but guarded. He was humbler, his vape chain struggling, and he admitted he'd envied my focus. "You always knew what you wanted," he said. I didn't gloat, I just listened. We parted with a hug, not close but not strangers. Marge sent letters hinting at reconciliation, but I wasn't ready. Maybe one day, but not now. My real family was Selma, Quentin, the team, the patients whose lives we touched. They saw me, not as a shadow of Lyle, but as Darcy, the woman who built a revolution from a napkin sketch. I looked at the scholarship fund's latest report on my laptop. 5 more girls funded, their essays full of fire. I smiled, thinking of Libby, the coder who'd reminded me of myself. My legacy wasn't just the scanner, it was the doors I was opening, the belief I was passing on. That was my peace, knowing I'd turned my pain into purpose, my doubt into light. The rain kept falling, solder purred, and I felt a quiet joy, not loud or flashy, but steady. I was home in myself, and no one could take that away. Have you ever felt unseen, like your dreams were dismissed by the people who should have cheered loudest? I know that ache, and I'm here to tell you, your worth isn't in their eyes, it's in you. I'd love to hear your stories in the comments. Share a time you proved yourself, or someone who lifted you up when you needed it. If my journey resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear that it's okay to define success on their own terms. Keep chasing what sets your soul on fire, because the world needs your light, and you're already enough.